Welcome to Diaspora, the show where we share the remarkable stories of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. I'm your host, Aditya Mehta, and each week we sit down with individuals who have made the journey over and explore their experiences, their challenges, and their triumphs. We delve into their unique perspectives on adapting to a new culture while staying connected to their roots. Today, we're joined by my friend Rohan Anthony. He's born in Bombay. He moved to Canada when he was 6 years old. I guess his parents moved and he went along. First Toronto and then Calgary. He currently works as an automation engineer with Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, where he moved primarily to be closer to his wife, Trish. Apart from all this, another thing that interests me about Rohan is his hobbies. He's got a sailing license and he's now working on a pilot's license, and he does all sorts of interesting things in his free time. I know Rohan through Amazon. We were colleagues in the team where I was launching new warehouses. He was there to help me for my first launch, in fact. The team was called the Startup Team. Eventually, we both moved on to different things, but stayed in touch. And we have a lot of good memories together, which we'll go into later in this show. With that, let's dive into this week's conversation. Rohan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Addy. Hey, everyone listening. Good to be here.
So, you were born in Bombay and you moved to Canada when you were 6. Were you in Bombay that whole period of time?
Majority of the time, yes. My dad used to work in Abu Dhabi, so that there would be some times where I would live with him. And my mom worked in BARC, which is the Atomic Research Center in Mumbai. So I was
Yeah.
born in a compound. So
Okay.
spend majority of my time in Bombay.
Okay. Do you have distinct memories of Bombay during that time? I'm guessing this was in the 90s. So I remember 90s Bombay very distinctively, and I have a lot of fond memories. So anything in particular that you remember from those days?
Yeah, I do remember. So I was very young, so I was always, whenever we traveled in the transit system, I would always go with my mom. So I didn't get to experience the male compartment, but
Yeah.
it was pretty crazy still back then. And I do have memories of whenever it rains, there's water up to your knees.
Yep.
So that was pretty fun because I needed to get held up. So I remember being with my mom,
Yeah.
and navigating the floods there.
Those are pretty distinct memories. So, more context for our listeners. When he says male compartment, the trains in Bombay have, the first class and the second class, but they also have a women's coach and a women's first class, which are separate. That was done primarily to ensure safety of women during the rush hours, where the train fits about 1,500 people, but it routinely has about 8,000 people in there. It's one of the most densely used transit systems in the world, carrying across the trains and the buses more than 10 million people a day. I haven't talked about the Bombay local trains on this show so far, but hopefully we'll have a guest soon who has enough of the train experience as an adult that we can talk and share our stories about it. Your last name is Anthony, but your first name is Rohan. And the last name it's a common Christian last name. The first name is a common Hindu name. Tell us more about how that happens, and is that very common where you're originally from?
Yeah, my parents are both Malayali as well. So in Kerala, I mean, all over India, there's a mix of cultures and religions. There's a lot of Christians in Kerala. So I guess that's where I got my last name from. My first name, I actually asked my mom, I'm like, how did you guys name me Rohan? And she was thinking about it and she was like, hey, we were actually going to name you Neil or Rohan. And my uncle was like, hey, let's name him Rohan and keep some of that Indian culture with the name. And everywhere I go, I think Rohan, it's also a kingdom in the Lord of the Rings. So a lot of people are like,
Yeah.
is that from the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
So telling a story and helping people relate helps them remember my name.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be named Rohan. I think Neil would have been a little bit boring.
Yeah. So, for our listeners, people who speak Malayali tend to be from the state of Kerala in South India. It's called God's own country because it is such a beautiful state. And it's one of the places that most tourists from abroad will go to on their first or second visit, the other being like the Taj Mahal or the state of Rajasthan. And Kerala is very beautiful. But one thing which I really like about Kerala is that everybody just gets along in Kerala. I feel like there's a Muslim population and a Christian population, a Hindu population. But the cultural identity is much stronger than the religious identity. And in mostly north part of the country, I would say the religious identity comes first. And then, because a lot of states speak the same language, so from state to state, the culture is not that distinct. Like the Middle East, they are different countries, but everybody speaks Arabic. So there's the religion that binds them first. Whereas in India, in the south and the west, each state has its own language and own culture and own food and own movie industry. And I think that makes the state identity more distinct. Where in the world can we find the most number of Malayalis, Rohan, besides in Kerala?
Well, if I had to guess, I'd probably say the Gulf,
Yeah,
maybe somewhere in the Middle East. So most
yeah,
of that they tend to leave India to go work abroad.
yeah. It's one of the states with a very large expatriate population.
Yeah.
Initially, I think they went as laborers, but now if you go to places like Dubai, you'll see Malayalis at every part of the socio-economic ladder. Some of the richest people and the biggest companies, like I think the Lulu Group, for example, in Dubai,
Yeah.
is Malayali owned as well. So it's a very distinct culture, very interesting English accent, I would say. Very hard to understand if you're not from India. Maybe that's why there's no call centers in Kerala, but there are in other parts of the country. So you moved at 6, and what brought about the move? Was your family looking for a better long-term life, or was it a job that made you move to Toronto?
Yeah. So my dad was an engineer in Abu Dhabi, and him and his friends all kind of started working in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi.
Yeah.
Then I guess there was a point in time where he was like, "Hey, I need to leave this place and I can provide for my kids, have a better opportunity." And some of his classmates moved to Australia, they moved to the US, they moved to Canada. And they even moved to Europe, like London, England. So he was thinking about, okay, where in the world can I raise a family? Where is it safe?
Yeah.
So he chose Canada because one of his best friends was in Toronto at the time. So we kind of followed our friends or people from
Yeah.
school, and we landed in Toronto. Fun story. So I landed, I think, about 6 hours before 9/11,
Wow.
September 10th, 2001.
Wow.
And I was very small, so I didn't really understand at the time what was going on. So
Yeah.
we woke up and we saw the news. I was watching a Cartoon Network, and then all the channels get changed over. I was probably too little to understand. I was like, "Where's the cartoons?" And now I'm like, if we were, I think, delayed a few hours, all the flights got grounded.
Yeah.
There was a big, like there was high schools converted in somewhere in the East Coast,
Yeah.
um, and we would have probably been stuck over there. So that probably might not have been a good
Yeah.
experience. So
And I think Canada did a lot to accept flights that were rediverted and provide temporary food, shelter. It's one of those world events where every single person remembers where they were when it happened.
yeah,
And obviously, tragic event, but I'm glad you got in a few hours before that happened. What were your first impressions of Toronto? Like, did you get into school right away? Did you have to wait for the next school year? How did that go?
yeah. So I started grade one, I believe. It was a very different culture for me. Like, for example, when I was in school in India, when we raise our hands, we go like this with one finger up. When someone calls you, you get up and you speak. So my first experience in school was people pointing at me and laughing at me because I did that.
Right.
So I think the first couple of years was a little bit difficult. I was put into ESL, English second language,
Yep.
due to my communication problems. But yeah, that was my first impressions. Straight into school. Yeah, and then we moved around a lot when I was younger. I could probably remember maybe 4 or 5 different schools
Yeah.
that I moved to. So coming out of that, I think there was a lot of people that I knew, but not deep enough to call them friends. I didn't really have too many friends that I could say, "Oh, this is my grade one or grade two friend."
Yeah. We had a guest from Dehradun a few weeks ago, and she moved when she was similar age, or I think maybe 9, but under 10. And she had the exact memory that you did, that she would get up and raise her hand and get up and say, "Teacher, can I say something?" And she would get mocked at. So even though it's a completely opposite part of India, some experiences are shared, I guess. I think it lends to us being a high context culture where there is, by definition, power distance between you and your professor, you and your boss. And that's where that respect of standing up gets accorded. I used to work in my family business in India, and there were people who reported to me who were older than me. But when I would walk into the office floor, they would instinctively stand up or at least straighten up in their seats. It's just power distance. They can't help themselves.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting first impression. Where did you go to college eventually?
Yeah. I think in 2008, my dad got a job in Calgary with an oil company there. She's basically runs on the oils and services. So we moved to Calgary, and then I went to the University of Calgary, did my mechanical engineering there. I kind of looked at it from a point of like my dad was a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
I had a good life, pretty stable job. I think the world needs engineers to solve problems. I was good at math, so kind of a no-brainer. And also in the Indian culture, engineer, doctor, lawyer,
Sure.
SEAL.
Yeah, my family is overweight on chartered accountants, and Mehta means accountant.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of teachers and doctors in our family too, but thankfully we didn't have any, and it didn't sound like you had pressure to be an engineer, but we also didn't have any pressure to be, I mean, my brother's a stand-up comedian, for crying out loud. So my parents were always like, whatever you want to do, just make sure you excel at it and not be a mediocre at it. That's interesting. Okay. Did you find a job easily after college? Because that would have been not a very good time for the economy, I would assume.
Yeah, so I graduated near the time where one of the oil crashes happened. So I couldn't find a job for a year. And I thought it was like an easy route to follow, graduate engineering, get a job in one of the oil companies. But life wasn't so easy. So I worked at the Apple store for a year. And that was probably one of the funnest jobs I've ever had. If you look at Apple as a company, the product almost sells itself. So the main focus was the customer experience, right? Of
Yeah.
when the customer walks in, how do they feel? Do you want to continue building that experience for them so they can keep coming back?
Yeah.
It's one of those products where I would talk to customers for 2-3 hours and there was no pressure on sales. So really interesting people that I met there, still friends with most of them. I really enjoyed that time. One, because I was just having fun. I was like on the weekends, I would go hike, work on myself, slow but surely like apply to jobs, seeing what I
Yeah.
wanted to do. Yeah, I think it was probably a blessing not to get into the workforce right away.
Right. One thing I want to point out for our viewers here is that, and listeners, is that the dignity of labor is very high in this part of the world. So no job is big or small. In India, very traditional parents might have been like, "Oh, you did an engineering degree to work in retail." But thankfully, I don't think that mindset exists here. And I worked in restaurant jobs when I was in college, and my friends from India would always be like, "Oh man, you have to work these jobs." And I was like, "No, I'm having a great time. Like, I'm learning so much and whatnot." So if a server would introduce their name in India, we would be like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you? I don't care about your name." But that's just how the culture there is. How did Amazon come about for you?
Yeah, so one day I was applying through my alumni portal and I saw area manager, new graduate hire. It was 2017 or 2018, I believe. Probably very kind of the growth phases of Amazon in Canada. And I was given an interview for an operations role in a fulfillment center in Brampton, Ontario. So they put me out there. I did an interview and I got the role. So I was very excited to move and start probably the first job in my professional career.
Yeah.
And it was hard working in operations in one of the highest volume buildings at the time. Definitely was not an easy task.
Was it Z4?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
YYZ4 in Brampton, Ontario.
I think that's where Somnil also worked, right?
Yeah, I don't remember seeing him at the time, but
Big warehouse though. I
yeah,
mean.
BK, one of our colleagues, he was across the street, Z3.
I interviewed Somnil a few weeks ago for the podcast, and he
Awesome.
mentioned his starting out in I think it was Z4 or Z3. He said it was the robotics fulfillment center. So maybe I got my numbers wrong. How many numbers and site codes we had to remember when we
Yeah.
were launching. Was it overwhelming in the first few weeks there? Because Amazon can do that to you.
Yeah, I remember the first week or second week, like I got emotional because of just the culture of the place. But I think in every job, there's going to be a point, the very early stages of that job, because you have to get to a point where you're at the baseline amongst everyone else.
Yeah.
And then there's pressure to get there faster so you can deliver value quicker. So all of that coupled with being in a new area, you don't have anyone to help you, you're all alone. I think that kind of added to the stress and the pressure. So definitely, I would say it's always hard starting a new role, but I was just like my mindset was it's only going to get better. Everything is there to teach you, so just keep going.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Was that the only role you did before joining the startup team that we were part of?
Yes. So I got promoted there, and then one of my managers there was like, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "I want to go to the ship dock." And this is one of the areas of the building that he kind of looked at me and was like, "What?" Like no one really asked to go and
Yeah.
get brutal. So I went there, and then 6 months later, I was like, I got to find something else.
Yeah. And I
um,
think testament to Amazon's culture is that once you get promoted or once you've been in a role for a while, it's okay to move roles within the company. And managers will usually not have a problem with that if you're moving on to something that's a better fit for you and for the company. On that note, let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about our startup team and our different stories about launching buildings together at Amazon. So we'll be right back after these messages.
The more you listen to your kids, the closer you'll be. So we asked kids, what do you want your parents to hear?
I feel sometimes that I'm not listened to. I would just want you to listen to me more often and evaluate situations with me and lead me towards success.
We're not adults, so just be there and listen. I just want someone to yap to. And I just feel like I'll be fine if someone just hears me talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk.
You're doing a really good job. And I don't think I tell you that enough. And I know sometimes we get into it and it's just hard on both of us. But, try to understand me more and I'll try to do the same.
Listening is a form of love. Find resources to help you support your kids and their emotional well-being at sounditouttogether.org. That's sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diasporaa, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diasporaa offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diasporaa Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
Alternative Talk, 1150 on AM, 98.9 HD3 on HD, 1150kknw.com on the web.
Welcome back to Diaspora on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. We're talking to Rohan Anthony, an automation engineer with some pretty amazing hobbies. So before the break, we were talking about just your initial days at Amazon. And as I mentioned earlier, you and I met at the startup team where we were launching buildings. How was that team experience for you overall in the context of all the different teams you've been in before and after that? Because for me, it was a very close to the high point. So curious to hear your experiences.
Yeah, I think that was the first time where I saw what a high-performing team looks like. I feel like Somnil, our manager, did a great job in hiring the right people and making sure that everyone had a high standard. And I think one of those reasons was because we were pretty much a startup in Canada.
Yeah.
scaling from 2 stations to 30 plus with minimal standards. There needs to be a lot of comfort with working with ambiguity, right? And trying to do things without standards and processes built. So majority of those standards and processes, we built those out, right? Together as a team. So yeah, it was really fun. I would say it was probably a really fun time in my career. I love to travel, so it was cool to travel across different time zones, different provinces, meet really cool people from different parts of Canada, experience good food from the East Coast as well. So yeah, it was like a master class of like, how do you scale up from nothing? And then and now when my parents get packages from Amazon, it's coming out of the site that I launched in Calgary. So it's super awesome.
That is definitely something, a source of pride. I was once talking to somebody at HQ, and I was talking about this exact same thing. It's like, I see packages from a station I was part of the launch, like DVC6, for example. And this one person goes, "Oh, that's a station I named." And she took as much credit for naming the station as I was taking for building the station. And I was like, it's not the same thing. And by the way, on that topic, what's with all these weird names? Because there are so many of these short codes, right? So I agree with you. And the practice of not wasting time in the down season, because we would finish our launches by September so that the buildings were ready for the peak in Thanksgiving and Christmas. We would have these lessons learned exercises where we would pick up all the learnings from the year and implement them in the business in various ways. I actually did that with my property management company this year. And we had a burst of new business. We got to maybe about 40 million in assets managed very quickly. And then we said, okay, let's take a pause now. Anyways, leasing during winter is not very active. So let's look at each thing we did and how we could have done it better. And took a good 3 months to do that. And now, again, we're able to support that breakneck growth. We'd probably be around 70 million assets now already. And I haven't broken a sweat, because last year with with almost half the business, I was working 7 days a week. And now I have enough time to do this podcast, for example. So I definitely took a lot of learnings from our team, and I'm pretty much in touch with everybody from that team, even future on. I think it spoiled Amazon for me to some extent, because every team after that, and there were some great teams I did work with, but it didn't keep up with that. Any memorable moments from that stint? Because I will also relate to those for the most part.
There's a lot of memorable moments. I think near the launch is usually a really good memorable moment for like all team members, because you'll have 2 launch managers supporting. And I do remember me coming over to one of your first sites, helping you launch the building
in Kitchener, Ontario. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a good time, because I think that's when I kind of got to know you a bit better.
Yeah.
And it was like right when you joined a few months later.
I launched that building before I completed 3 months at Amazon.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the most intense experiences of my life. I think when we went to Atlantic Canada for the new program that we're launching, I don't want to name it because of, I don't know what's happening with that program now, but, and we spent some time looking at all these different sites in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. That was pretty a fun experience too, because it's 4.5 hour time zone difference. You think the US is a big country? Like Canada is like, it's even bigger. Like the distances are even further out. And because there's maybe 1/10 the people, it just feels a lot emptier, I guess.
Yeah. And for the people on the stream here, while we were traveling on East Coast of Canada, that's when I got a first introduction to Addy's playlist, his Indian rap playlist.
That playlist has since been shared with many, many people. So now, thanks to you, my listeners know that I really like Indian rap music. And it's, if you hear it, you may not understand the languages. I mean, even I don't understand most of those languages, but the rhyme schemes and the stories are very similar to how rap music here was in like the 80s and 90s. I can send you an updated version if you like. But on that note, I've been asking this question to some of the folks I know better, because my audience is yet getting to know me. What were your first impressions of me? And what was your experience working with me, like good and bad, both?
One, I was really impressed how structured you were, and you knew a lot about everything. I could just ask you a question and it would just go off, and you would have stories about you living in London and just experiences and storytelling. So I think your ability to storytell was amazing. And in life now, it's all about telling stories. And if you can tell a
Yep.
story well, you can sell an idea. You can.
Yep.
I think that's the criticality to communication.
Yeah.
You make people feel some way and bring them along for the ride.
I appreciate that. And the organized trait is something my son also has now. If you see how his toys are laid out, he's got all those same traits. And the stories also came from the fact that I was probably 10 years older than the rest of the team. And all of you were in your 20s. I was in my early 30s. And for me, that was a way to get into Amazon with a high functioning team. So thanks for sharing those first impressions. At one point, you moved from there to, I believe, a design engineering role, it was, within the company. So what were all the different roles you did after our startup days?
Yeah, so right after startup, I was actually looking at a potential move to either London, England, or I think there was like a process engineering arm there with the EU, or moving to Seattle. And, I was like, if I'm going to move across the pond, I'm going to be very close, far away from my family in Calgary. So I think being close to family, being close to my friends, that was very important to me. And Canada is a very short flight away. That was the kind of the tipping point that kind of led me to pursue a role in Seattle. So that role was designing like the sortation centers and providing a package, a final integrated package to all the stakeholders that they would use to execute the buildings. Yeah. Moving upstream, project execution to design. It was something that I was part of the design team in startup.
Yeah, I remember that.
So there was a lot of items that I was familiar with. Moving there was very organic. I met a ton of really cool people, my new role. So it was cool. I was leading emerging markets, which was launching sortation centers in Australia. There was one in Australia that was working on. There's one in Brazil. It's very interesting to work across global countries, different time zones. I couldn't really understand some people, so it's all small hurdles.
One thing I actually struggled with is our startup role was so broad, and you had such a big budgetary and just otherwise responsibility, because it's a 100 employee delivery station that has to launch on time. And I got used to executing this very large projects and having a huge amount of authority and responsibility for them. Your role sounds more like it was not as broad, it was more focused. And I had the same kind of roles after that startup team. Was that a thing that bothered you or you struggled with? Because I really did struggle with that.
With being in more focus, you said?
Yeah, like you launched this building and all this operations teams, your customers come in, they see this shiny new building, you're the guy who launched it. In case of our colleague Lachlan, you're standing there with aviators, like just looking cool, like I'm the guy who launched this building. He was just missing a cape. And then my roles further down were more specific, like let's optimize this label on this package and let's spend 6 months just doing that, because Amazon has the scale to have a well-paid person look at a very narrow problem because the benefits are exponential. So I struggled with that a lot in going from this broad customer-centric role to a very narrow analytical role. Is that something you felt? Was kind of what my question was.
I think there was like challenges. I mean, with my role in design, you have to be able to step up and down as required. So some days you would be designing on CAD. Some days, you'd be presenting and directing architects to develop these drawings. So I don't know. That's a good question. Tough.
And also teams are very different in their cultures. If you move from one org to the other, things noticeably can be different. Ours was, because it was growing so quickly, it was like a wild west of Amazon. And Canada was the wild west of Amazon Logistics, because we, like you said, we grew from 2 to 36 stations in those 2 years. So I think we would also have, and I didn't leave AMZL the whole time I was there, but did you notice a difference in culture at all?
Yeah, I think going into America, like the market is huge. You're not in that startup phase anymore. Just trying to build those relationships again. That's probably the most difficult is as you step into a new role is you have to build those connections, those relationships. I think the technicalities are very simple, but growing those authentic relationships take time. So you got to kind of nurture it, build those relationships early on.
As our supervisor, Somnil would say, it's simple, but it's not easy. So, how did you like Seattle after being in Calgary/Toronto?
There was pros and cons to it. I'm not much of I need sunlight. So there was multiple days
Sure.
where it really bothered me just being in a gloomy environment. But overall, it was a really cool city. I would go every weekend to volunteer for teaching students math. That's something I was looking forward to for every weekend. And that helped me get into Seattle for that weekend to help me explore different coffee shops, restaurants,
Right.
and just spend my time in the city, but also stay far away from it after I was done and come back to Bellevue. I think Bellevue was a little bit more tame.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, because I come from Bombay, where we have monsoon 4 months of the year when, like you said, it floods, I'd be happy it flooded only up to my knees. Usually it was more. But the Seattle rain doesn't scare me. It gets gloomy, sure, but it's like a passive aggressive rain, I feel. And I feel like the summer more than makes up for it. I shouldn't be talking, it's May and we're still in gloomy weather here, but usually the summer does make up for it. What got you interested in sailing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was a construction manager. I don't remember his name, but we went on a conference and he was telling me there was 6 or 7 different sailing clubs in Seattle, and he brought his sailboat and he lived out of there for the conference. So I was like, what? So I Googled all the sailing clubs and I found there was one club in Kirkland that was really close to me. So I joined the club and I started racing on small boats on the lake on Tuesdays, like weekly races, and then slowly built the knowledge of how to operate a boat by myself and as a team. And then it got a little bit boring. So I was like, you know what, like, let me try sailing on the ocean, and then kind of got to bigger and longer passages. With the longest one, I think it was 2 weeks from the Chesapeake Bay to Antigua.
Wow.
Yeah, sailing through the Bermuda Triangle. So, I mean, I survived. I think
Yeah.
it depends on your luck, depends on your fate, and it depends on a lot of planning and making sure that you
Sure.
understand what your limitations are and not trying to test God or whatever.
Yeah. I think you took multiple such trips on the ocean, right? What were some of the other destinations you went to?
Yeah, I went to Bermuda, once Bahamas. I think that was about it. Yeah.
What do you enjoy most about being on the boat? And I mean, once in like when we were on Lake Washington, the peace and serenity, but there's also these, I'm sure, choppy, stormy conditions out on the open ocean. That whole experience taken holistically, what's your favorite thing about sailing?
Yeah, I think everything in life, you need to have a little bit of a risk involved, which is something that makes it worthwhile. You need to be around people, and I think sailing, you got to build a team.
Yeah, and trust them with your
And
life, literally.
exactly. I mean, for me, for some of these trips, I didn't even know who I was sailing with until I met them the day of departure. And people think that's so crazy. Like, what if you're on a boat with a crazy person? And
Yeah,
that's one of the risks that you have to take.
yeah,
You're on a boat floating in the middle of the ocean, and
yeah,
if anything goes wrong, you have to fix it.
yeah,
Um, and there's no turning back or calling, AMA or CAA to come fix it. So
Right.
it's being resourceful and then making sure that you follow standards and your limitations and know when, hey, it might be time to turn back.
Yeah.
There was one trip where we did choose to turn back because of a hurricane approaching. So
Sure. Probably a good call.
yeah, it's just fun to go on an adventure for the world. Back then, I don't know how anyone crossed the ocean not even knowing there was something outside. I think that's really scary.
Yeah. With that, let's go into our next break. And when we return, we'll talk about what he's doing now at Walmart and his life in Arkansas. And if we get time, we'll go into some advice for new immigrants as well. So let's come back after these messages.
You said you'd never buy your kid candy from the checkout aisle. Or forget extra diapers. And never give in to a meltdown. You'd never lick your thumb to clean their face. Never let them have too much screen time. And never bribe them for just one more bite. You say you'd never let them out in public without their hair brushed. Never, ever become a minivan mom. And you'd never give them your phone for a quiet dinner.
Calling boss work phone.
So when you say you'd never leave your child in a hot car, no, it can happen. Cars get hot fast, and kids can be at risk in temperatures as low as 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Never happens. Before you leave the car, always stop, look, lock. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Chris Erdman. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW, I sit down with inspiring entrepreneurs, creative minds, and game changers to uncover the real stories behind their business. On my show, Made of More, we explore the challenges that they've overcome, the breakthroughs that they've celebrated, and the mindset that drives them forward. If you're ready to unlock your full entrepreneurial potential, Made of More is the show for you, because here we know you are made of more. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW.
Alternative Talk 1150, the talk of the sound.
Welcome back to Diaspora on KKNW, where we share interesting stories of first-generation immigrants from South Asia. We're talking to Rohan Anthony, automatic adventurer, automation-based adventurer. I don't know how else to, that was bad. So what made you move from sunny Seattle to boring Bentonville in Arkansas?
Yeah, so I honestly would not be opposed to still being with Amazon. I think that was always kind of in the plan. I didn't have a goal to leave.
Yeah.
But my wife, she was in Pittsburgh. I was doing long distance with Trish. And she just graduated her master's and she got a job with Walmart. So it was only natural to try and move here and support her with her new role. So yeah, I tried to make it work with Amazon, but I think with the RTO coming in, it was either Seattle or some other headquarter building.
Which definitely would not be anywhere close to Bentonville, right? They didn't have any office.
So I was like, you know what? I'll just move to Bentonville and see how, what works. I didn't have a job lined up. With the move coming, I started applying, and I actually didn't land at Walmart right away. I was with Tyson Foods. It's one of the biggest chicken producers. I think they supply about 1 in 5 pounds of chicken across America. So I was a senior engineer there for a year, and then got a role with Walmart in their automation team and automating the supply chain of distribution. And that's what brought me to Bentonville. I would say it was falling in love.
Sure. It's a great reason to move. A lot of our guests, their reason for moving to this part of the world was they got married or they want to be closer to someone who they were dating, things like that. So what are you automating exactly to the extent that you can share? Is it processes? Is it conveyor systems or something else?
Yeah, so we have 42 regional distribution centers across North America. And current processes are very manual, and we've signed a deal with this company called Symbiotic to automate the entire end-to-end process within the distribution that will support our workers and also help with productivity as well, and creating overall, I would say, amplifying the people have in the warehouses.
Yeah. What are the main ways in which the cultures are similar and different between Walmart and Amazon? Because they're both big retail / supply chain companies.
Yeah, very process oriented. One kind of difference is Amazon is very heavy on white papers,
Yeah.
where Walmart is very heavy on presentations. Got to
I've
make sure
written,
that you can.
like you, I've written my fair share of white papers at Amazon. I actually
Yeah.
wrote one for my own life when I was transitioning from Amazon to what I'm doing now. And it was an incredibly useful exercise. So I don't doubt the efficacy of those white papers. And so you said that's one way they're different. Anything else that comes to mind?
There's a very strong focus on people, and I think it's required in companies that are so large.
Yeah.
Is you should have a strong organizational structure. So
Yeah.
that's very similar. And like you mentioned before, there's a very narrow scope, and you kind of focus on that due to the scale. There's so many people working on so many different things. So I would say that's kind of mostly what I found.
There's a stereotypical image of Arkansas, it being a red state, it being the Ozark Mountains. I think those are the stereotypes I associate. Is Bentonville kind of similar to that stereotype, or was it different? And if so, in what way?
I didn't really experience any sort of discrimination here. I think Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas, is like a melting pot of so many different cultures. There's a huge cricket fan base here. People play cricket all the time. There was a tournament here, I think last year or something. And on Thursday this week, Kapil Dev came to speak at the Walmart Associates. And my mom was here, so she had the opportunity to meet one of the legends in cricket.
Yeah.
And out of all the places in the world, why did Kapil Dev come to Bentonville? I have no idea.
You don't question good things. But just more context for our listeners, Kapil Dev is one of the most famous cricket players from India. He was the captain of the Indian cricket team when they won the World Cup for the first time in 1983. There's a movie about him called, I think, 1983 or 83.
83.
Yeah, which talks about that whole journey and how India came from being a ragtag team to beating the West Indies in the World Cup, which was the most feared and dominant team at the time. So that was a story for the ages. That's pretty interesting. So I guess on account of Walmart global headquarters being there, it's multicultural, and that reflects in the types of food options you have and whatnot, is what I would presume.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
It's kind of like a mix between, it's a very small town vibe, I would feel. So it's very close to what I grew up in. We would just go for drives and see cattle, farms.
Yeah.
There's no skyscrapers here. I think the tallest building is 6 or 7 stories. So it still has that small town vibe, but also kind of the fast pace if you're looking for it as well.
Yeah. Tell me more about flying. What got you into that hobby?
Yeah, so I was really bored when I got here, and driving around, I just saw a bunch of planes, and there's a lot of airstrips here. I think in this area, there was 6 or 7 in a very small, dense square footage. And it was always my childhood dream to be a pilot. And I was like, hey, maybe life brought me here to learn how to fly. And I just jumped in, got my pilot's license in October last year. And then a month ago, I just got my instrument rating. So for all those listening, an instrument rating basically allows you to fly in the clouds. So if you have no visual of the ground or any reference points, so you have to trust in your instruments. You might feel like you're sideways, but you're actually level. So you have to learn to not listen to what your vestibular system is telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of taken me to very cool small towns around the area, very small airports with like really cool cultures, food spots, flying breakfasts. And it's been really fun. So I'm going to keep flying and see where it takes me.
Do you plan to make that a career at any point, or this is more a hobby or fly your own plane kind of thing?
Yeah, no expectations. I think when you have a goal and you kind of set expectations for yourself, and if you don't or do achieve it, there's emotions associated with that might not be good for you. So I think always keeping it fun as a hobby and then see where it takes you later.
Yeah. I did a discovery flight in Seattle a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I took my dad along for the ride, and it was a lot of fun. I don't know if I would be a good pilot to begin with, or I have the temperament to be one, but I can definitely see you excelling at that. You've had a pretty rapid rise at Amazon for the time you were there. What advice do you have for people fresh out of college? A lot of Indians and South Asians come here for their master's degree and after that join Amazon right after. So what advice do you have for them to do well in a company like that? And what should their mindset be, and any tips that you can share?
Yeah, I would share that I think when you're young, you kind of want to go and deliver, and you want to keep getting promoted or keep stepping up. And then during all that grind, you forget the good parts. So
Yeah.
it's better to focus on and deliver results, of course, but also slow down a bit and see, is getting a promotion, like, why do I want that?
Yeah.
And maybe a promotion it's probably not the best idea. Maybe having a fun time and enjoying your job is
Yeah.
probably a better idea to conserve on your mental health sometimes.
Yeah, when I was at level 5 in Amazon, the number one thing I wanted to do was to get to level 7 as quickly as I could. And then when I got to level 6 and saw how hard the 7s were working, I said, I think 6 is fine. And Amazon, because there's so few levels, the responsibility goes exponentially with each level. And I see our leadership in that level 7, they work incredibly hard, and I don't see them smiling much, especially during those really stressful times of the year when you're launching a lot of buildings or delivering certain programs and whatnot. So from here on, what's the plan for the next few years? Just status quo and enjoy your relatively new marriage and relatively new job and just stick around?
Yeah, I just graduated the University of Arkansas with a master's in supply chain. So the last couple of years was a lot of weekends sacrificed for homework and studying.
Right.
So I think in the short term, just take a breather, reset, consolidate all the learnings that I had in the past 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I would say just keep following what makes you happy, what you like to do.
Yeah.
And
if I had remembered before that you are now a Razorback as a Texas Longhorn, I wouldn't invite you on my show at all, but it's okay. It's water under the bridge. Let's go into a couple of our weekly segments and see what Rohan has to say about those. So can we please spin the wheel?
Oh, there's a wheel there.
Yeah, we have a wheel. This one is called, it's one of our most popular recurring segments. It's called Mango Memories. So most people from our part of the world have distinct memories around eating mangoes in various shapes and forms. Do you have any such mango memories?
Yeah, so I think this is a Malayali word, but anda, do you know what that means?
No.
So anda is the seed inside a mango.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's after you cut the mango,
Yeah.
if you cut it in cubes, it's the part that is, I would say, with the most flesh and probably the most flavorful, probably the most fun to eat because it could probably fly out of your hand as you eat it.
Yeah.
So my favorite memory is fighting for the anda after it's been cut.
Sure. Yeah, kids would fight for them. I've been reluctant to share my memories because I do this all the time. I'm the constant on this show. But there's been many instances where I would finish eating the whole mango with my hands and the slippery seed inside. And in Gujarati, they're called the gutli. And it would, because it's still kind of mango slimy, it would just like pop out of my hand, and I would go chasing this seed all over the house and thereby causing a big, almost like a skid mark of mango all around my house. And my mom would always be upset at that. She's like, why can't you just eat in the plate? I think we have time for one more. So let's spin the wheel again. This one's called maa ka khana. So in Hindi, that means mother's food. So is there any meal or food in particular that takes you instantly back to home, be it Calgary at home or the very places you've lived in India?
Yeah, every time I go back to India or before I go back to Calgary, the one dish that I always ask for or pray that is there is appam and chicken curry.
Okay.
So I think it's called vela appam.
Okay.
You have a dish that's kind of like a semicircle. You pour in this rice paste, like a pancake, and you kind of heat it up. So the edges are very thin, like wafers, but the center has a little bit of thickness to it. It's sweet, and you dip it in either to a savory curry type, like chicken curry or stew.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite dish.
So I'm going to include a recipe for that in our show notes.
Sure.
And more context for our listeners, the chicken curry that Rohan's talking about is probably going to be very different from the chicken curry that someone from a different state would talk about. So there's no one chicken curry. As you know, here, most of the Indian restaurants, the Indian food they have is actually Punjabi food, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's lost that on people that there's so many different types of Indian food and even so many types of street food, so many types of rice preparations. So I'm going to look out for this recipe and share it with everyone so that they see it's not the same as a chicken tikka curry or anything on those lines. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Diaspora. We hope you enjoyed hearing Rohan's interesting stories and his hobbies. Remember to check out our show notes for links and for more information about the topics discussed in today's episode. You can find Diaspora on all major podcast platforms and can subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And if you like this episode, consider following us on Instagram or leaving us a 5-star review. Diaspora is part of the Staying Power network of shows and podcasts, all of which are dedicated to inspiring listeners to build lives of meaning, connection, and value. You can find the Staying Power network of shows wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another interesting story from the South Asian diaspora. Until then, take care and stay curious. And Rohan, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Adi. See you soon.